Perfect. Hi guys, and welcome to this latest podcast episode, where today we've got a really exciting discussion with Professor Jonathan Glazzard, where today we'll be discussing the topic of teacher wellbeing, in particular mental health. Now, this follows on from the first episode of the mini-series around teacher wellbeing. And first of all, Jonathan, thanks for taking the time to take the interview with us. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment, so I know us and the listeners are extremely excited to get involved with this one. So first of all, thanks for coming and thanks for taking the time. If you want to get in touch with either ourselves or Jonathan after the discussion, then Jonathan's Twitter handle is @J_Glazzard. Equally, if you want to get in touch with us on Instagram, it's @TheTeachersOfTomorrow, or on Twitter as well, @TFTpod. Sam, over to you, my friend.
Well, just like I say, really appreciate the fact that you've joined us for this episode. Both me and Matt have been really excited about it, and like Matt said, we really appreciate the time that you've given to us, because in that you've been down in government advising them as well, which we'll hopefully be able to touch on a little bit later. For our viewers or listeners who are going to listen, hopefully, to this episode, if you're not aware who Jonathan is, he's a current professor of inclusive education. He's a director of the Centre for LGBTQ+ Inclusion in Education, and he's a principal researcher in the Carnegie Centre of Works of Excellence for Mental Health in Schools. Furthermore to this, back in 2015, he was awarded the National Teaching Fellow status by the Higher Education Academy, which I think I'm right in thinking that you are now a Principal Fellow for. I was just wondering quickly if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that award and what your role is as Principal in that role.
So okay, Sam. So the National Teaching Fellow is a prestigious award that's awarded by the Higher Education Academy to, I guess, it's a very competitive award, and it has to be supported by the institution. So it's basically you have to demonstrate evidence of a national impact on teaching and learning in higher education, and you have to demonstrate evidence of teaching excellence in higher education on a national scale. So I was awarded that back in 2015. The Principal Fellowship of the HEA is something different. So the National Teaching Fellow sits outside of that, but the Principal Fellow of the HEA is basically evidence of a strategic commitment to learning and teaching in higher education. So it's about influencing policies and practices around teaching, learning and assessment within my own institution. So that's and again, that's a prestigious award. It's difficult to achieve because you have to be in a position where you can actually influence institutional-wide policies around teaching, learning and assessment. So you've got to be in the right role, really, to be able to do that.
No, honestly, I'm really grateful for you elaborating on that. And fascinating, really fascinating, interesting. And obviously touching on the fact that you've obviously stepped into research, just so you guys are aware as well, Jonathan is actually a qualified teacher, and he was an assistant head before he stepped into research, essentially. So, and since you've gone into research, Jonathan's also published 40 books, which is madness.
Madness. How have you got the time? Where's the time going?
I think it's a bit mad as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, then, what made you want to transition from being an assistant head, because obviously that's very high up within education? Why did you want to make the transition into research?
So I was a teacher for 10 years. I worked in Barnsley, and I absolutely loved it. And I never thought I would leave schools, really. And then I wanted to kind of make a difference on a wider scale. So I'd been teaching for 10 years. I was seeking another opportunity, but I'd become an assistant head, but I decided that I didn't really want to go through the normal route of becoming a deputy and then becoming a head. And I was looking for other opportunities that would enable me to impact on education on a wider scale. So I thought, well, teach training, is probably the way to go. So I started to look for opportunities in teacher training, and that's when I went to Huddersfield and started leading the primary education courses.
And just on that note then, because obviously, I mean, you've said it there, you wanted to make a difference on a wider scale. Obviously, through your research and stuff, I think it's safe to say that you probably have, compared to if you just stayed in a primary school. But do you feel, from being in a research position and being in a primary school position as an assistant head, were the impacts you were making, were they different to each other?
They are different because when you work in teacher education, which is what I do now, so I train teachers. I work on the BA primary education course and the PGCE primary education course. Obviously, I've worked with hundreds of trainee teachers now over the last 15 years. So then the impact is different because it's about teacher development and supporting trainee teachers to be the best teachers they can be. So rather than having an impact on a class, it's having an impact on all of those teachers and all of those careers, really, and then indirectly that has the impact on the children they're working with. So I think my influence really is about instilling values of inclusive education. So when I worked in schools, I was a SENCO. And that's where my interest in inclusion came from. So I coordinated the special educational needs provision. I worked in a school that had lots of children with autism. We had resource provision for children with autism. I then decided to develop my interest further. So eventually I did a master's degree focusing on inclusion. It focused on dyslexia, actually. And then once I'd done my master's degree, I'd got the interest in research, and that's when I decided then to go on and do my doctorate. I was doing my doctorate whilst I was still teaching in school, so before I even transitioned into university. So I was doing a part-time doctorate and being a class teacher at the same time.
So writing 40 books then seems pretty easy then.
I don't know about that.
Time management must be unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah, so I just really, I think my interest in inclusion comes from being a special needs coordinator and, really championing, I guess, children who are marginalised. I've always been interested in, supporting those children who sit on the margins. And children with special needs, children with behavioural needs, etc. And these are often the children who do get marginalised by the system. Mm-hmm. Often the education system doesn't meet their needs, and often they get blamed, for the difficulties they have, when actually it's the system that's actually failing them. So I went on and did my master's. I then carried on and did my doctorate, and then I transitioned into teacher training. And that's when I became more interested in teacher development.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you've touched on that, because, like you say, as any teacher, we all want to make an impact. But obviously, originally you started with just being in school, and then from your experiences being in school, you've wanted to do more and go into that teacher development, sort of teacher training side of things. You've recognised that you can impact teachers similar to me and Sam, as well as a lot of people that are listening now. Yeah. Teachers like us, who learn from you and learn from these sort of conversations and your experiences and research, and then moving forward, we can hopefully sort of put that into our own classroom practices, which again hopefully has more of a wider impact rather than just the 30 kids or 100 kids you have, in
and it's interesting over the years I've been teaching. So I've been teaching 25 years, and it's interesting how the roles have actually changed over that time in school. So when I became a teacher in the mid 1990s, it was very very traditional. So you became a class teacher. Yeah. And then if you want a promotion, you then became a deputy, then you became a head, etc. And now I think with the growth of things like multi-academy trust, there's a lot more sort of interesting diverse roles and routes that you can now take. So you can now actually you see jobs advertised that are now leading a subject across a multi-academy trust. So you might be taking English and leading that across the trust. So you're then responsible for standards within that subject, but also teacher development within that subject. And you see that for roles like maths or behaviour or teaching and learning across a trust. And I think that just makes it more interesting now, because there's lots of opportunities in teaching that didn't necessarily exist when I qualified. And I think some people just get to the point of wanting a new challenge within teaching. So it's not that you're bored with teaching a class, it's just that you want to do something different. For some people, teaching a class of children 5 lessons a day, 5 days a week, isn't what they want to do for 40 years. They want different challenges within their career. So it's great now that we're now seeing lots of diverse roles within education. And the message I would say to any trainee teacher is, don't think that just because you've done a primary course that's what you're fixed with for the rest of your career. You could move into further education, you could move into secondary education, you could move into higher education. Once you've got QTS, you can teach any age group. And often trainee teachers don't realise that. They think that they're stuck with the phase they've trained in.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought that what you train for, like the primary education, I thought, yeah, well, thank you.
No,
yeah.
So like, for example, one of my trainee teachers this year, actually, who's just completed the BA Primary Education course. So he's done 3 years primary, he's now teaching in secondary. So he saw a job that was actually coordinating and leading mental health across the secondary school. And because actually he'd focused on inclusion as his specialism and was really passionate about mental health, saw that job, thought, wow, that looks like a really interesting job, I'm going to go for that. And he got the job.
Oh, wow.
So, you're not fixed with the phase that you actually choose. Yeah. And I know lots of primary school teachers who've moved into secondary, and the other way around, secondary moved into primary. I think it just keeps you interested and keeps you lots of different irons in the fire, really.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there what you've discussed about having different roles in education is something that I know personally, even from my sort of experience over the last 2 years of doing the accelerated degree, that focusing on the wider issues of education, it's kind of made me think sort of down the line where I want to be going. Do I want to be just, teaching in the classroom for the next, like, say, 20, 30 years? Whereas now I'm thinking more down the policy line of things, going forward after 5, 10 years, looking at masters, similar sort of thing as you. And again, it's just an example of me maybe being a bit naive when I'm going into my teacher education about, I'm going to be a teacher forever now, that's it, when actually you don't realise sort of how many diverse routes you could take.
And I actually think also that years ago people did do that, so people sort of thought, oh well, teaching is going to be a lifelong career and I'll do that. But I think young people nowadays actually don't think like that. I mean, you're a young person, but I think young people now are more likely to have portfolio careers and do different things. I don't know if that's the right term, but I think they want to do different things within their working lives, really, rather than just do the same thing. Yeah. Although obviously if you choose to do the same, if you choose to be a teacher for 40 years, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, just want to touch on there. Thanks for calling me young. I'm 29. I'll take that.
Why have you said that to him? Why have you called him young?
That is very young.
I'll take that. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Just like to say, Sam touched on about recently you've been down to Downing Street and advising the government on sort of well-being, and particularly, I'm assuming, mental well-being. Just wondered if you could sort of elaborate a bit more on maybe what you were doing down there and sort of what area you were kind of advising on, some moving forward, teacher education wise.
So I've done a couple of things, really. So the first thing that I did a couple of years ago was that I was invited to an Ofsted roundtable event to advise Ofsted about their new inspection framework in schools. So and for teacher training as well. So they were developing a new Ofsted framework for schools, which obviously was published last year, 2019.
Yeah.
And what they wanted to know at the time was whether to make mental health a much greater focus in the new inspection framework. And of course, we all said, there was lots of people, me from education, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., and we all said absolutely mental health has to be a bigger focus in the new Ofsted framework. Because obviously without mental health, if children aren't mentally healthy, they won't succeed academically. So for me, the two things are connected, they're not separate things. So if children are mentally healthy, they're more likely to thrive academically. But that's not just the reason to do it. It's the right thing to do anyway, isn't it, to support children's mental health. So so I was really pleased when the Ofsted framework was published, and under the section personal development, now children have to be taught a mental health curriculum. So it's actually in there. I actually wanted it under the leadership category, as well as under personal development, because for me, mental health is about leadership and strategy within schools. So it's about the leaders being absolutely committed to mental health and really prioritising it and making sure it's part of the strategic plan and part of the school improvement plan. So I'm disappointed that it wasn't in the leadership category, but actually at least it's in there. So then the meeting with Downing Street, so that's all about advising the government on the 16 to 24 year old age group, because that's the age group now the government are really concerned about in terms of mental health. So we know, for example, adolescence is a tricky time for lots of young people. We know that during adolescence, young people go through multiple transitions. We know that obviously they're adapting to new ways of learning. They're transitioning into further education and higher education. Some of them are transitioning into employment. They're transitioning into independent living. They're transitioning into relationships. They're experiencing identity transition. So there's lots of transitions going on, and we know that mental health is on the increase. Poor mental health is on the increase for that particular age group. So that was actually to advise the government on strategy for the 16 to 24 year old age group.
And I think it's like you say, it's so important for that age group, particularly with what's going on and the amount of pressures that are sort of surrounding people of that age now, not just recently, but previously as well. You said about the Ofsted framework, touching on sort of mental health being included in the curriculum. Like I say, do you feel that if that was maybe in the leadership area as well, that going forward that would sort of have a real positive impact on, by the time they're at the age of 16 to 24 in 10 years time, for example, that'll really start to have a positive sort of impact on people's mental health and for children or for adolescents?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason I wanted it in the leadership section of the framework is because for me, it's about a whole school approach to mental health, which is very strategic. It's not just about the curriculum. The curriculum is part of it. It's one element of the whole school approach. So children need to know about mental health. It starts with children in the early years, learning about feelings, learning about how to name feelings, learning about how to regulate their feelings and emotions. So that's where it starts. But then eventually children need to learn about the language of mental health. They need to learn about how to look after their mental health as well as their physical health. They need to learn about the relationship between physical health and mental health. They need to learn strategies for managing their mental health, etc. So that's how it progresses. Children need a curriculum, but the curriculum is only part of the whole school approach. So actually, there has to be robust systems in the school for identifying children with poor mental health. And those systems need to go beyond just identifying children that demonstrate visible signs of poor mental health. So, we all know that visible signs could be, if children suddenly appear to be withdrawn or tired or, disengaged, if their progress starts to decline, etc. These can all be visible signs of poor mental health, but we know that with mental health, it's not just about visible signs. Some children could be actually experiencing poor mental health, but appear to be functioning as though they're absolutely fine. So the systems in school need to be robust enough to actually catch those children. Otherwise, children will fall through the cracks, really. Yeah. So it's about identification. It's about working in partnership with parents, because actually, we know that there's a possibility that if children have poor mental health, parents may also have poor mental health. Yeah. And parents also need strategies to manage the mental health of their children at home. So it's about that. It's about working in partnership with students and pupils and children, and finding ways forward for them. So it's about a whole school approach, and it's also about positive school cultures in which children and staff can thrive and experience a sense of belonging. So for me, it's a whole school approach, and that's why I think it should be part of the leadership. Yeah. And when policies are introduced, I think they should be introduced through the lens of mental health and wellbeing. So, if, for example, if the school's introducing a behaviour policy, what impact will that policy have on children's mental health?
Yeah, it's a real collaborative effort then to kind of change attitudes and cultures towards how mental health really is perceived in education, and say how it can really be addressed. Maybe just rather than just people that, like you say, are visibly affected by it, the people that maybe aren't showing the signs, that they kind of know how to approach it, and people around them can recognize that without there actually being any signs. So like I say, I think it is definitely a cultural shift that we need to have in schools to
absolutely
change.
And when I did research with young people in Cambridge a couple of years ago, and I said to them, if you had a mental health problem, would you talk to your teachers? And they said, absolutely not. They said, we don't trust our teachers because they'll have to refer it on to someone. I said, would you talk to your parents? And they said, absolutely not. I said, well, who would you talk to? And they said, a friend. So therefore, this is about things like peer mentoring, training up peer mentors in schools to be good peer listeners. And mental health ambassadors and mental health advisors, because actually children tend to prefer to be supported by their peers rather than adults. So actually, if other young people can spot the signs and know how to support their peers, then I think that's really powerful.
I think just following on from the points that you and Matt have made, within your book, Supporting Student Health Within Higher Education, there was a stat that said from 2006 to 2016, there was a 12% increase of first-year students who were suffering from mental health, and also as well, adults who were suffering from mental health. 3/4 of these adults stated that they were suffering from mental health issues before the age of 25. Now, obviously, that's a big range of age from 25 and below. But how much of a contribution do you feel like that the education system actually has on young people's mental health, and how much does it impact them, especially because you talked about the transitions into higher education? Do you think that the education system prepares them enough for those transitions in their life and these difficulties and issues that they might face, like with relationships and things like that?
Yeah, good question, Sam. So I'm just writing that down. Okay.
Right.
One of the issues, I think, is that the education system, young people go through a schooling system that is very, very structured and very didactic, and they get told how to pass exams. They get trained in exam techniques, etc. And then they come into higher education, and it's a significant shock. So it's a completely new way of learning. It's a new way of teaching. It's a new way of assessment, and they struggle often with that transition into higher education because it's they're expected to be more autonomous. They're expected to work in teams, etc., and they're probably not used to doing that. So I think the education system doesn't help children to prepare for what is coming next, for the next phase of education. And also the exam stress that children are under in school actually is, it's a massive problem. We know that causes anxiety in young people, and also the curriculum narrowing that we've seen, particularly in primary schools over the last 15 years. We've seen this squeezing of the curriculum so that everything then in primary schools has become about maths and English. And children have done very little art, they've done very little DT, they've done very little history, they've done very little music, and we know that restriction of the curriculum, that curriculum narrowing, has a massive effect on their mental health. Because, for example, you imagine if you're not good at maths and English and then you don't get the chance to do anything else, then you think you're a failure. because actually the curriculum is all about maths and English. And the only thing that is measured and assessed is maths and English, particularly in primary school. So therefore, you know, you might be fantastic at art, you might be fantastic at music, but where is that being promoted and nurtured within the curriculum, and where is that being assessed and recognised that you're good at those things? So, you know, I'm pleased that Ofsted have recognised that this is a problem, and they're now saying we need to go back to a broad and a balanced curriculum in primary education, because, you know, it's been a problem for years, but they've actually caused this problem. I have to say that Ofsted have created this problem because of the relentless focus on judging schools by their scores, their test results in maths and English.
And I think on that note as well, I think it's quite interesting that we're talking about obviously like students' well-being as well. Like, how much of an impact does this like Ofsted's pressures that they've put on teachers through like this focus on results, testing, exams? How much pressure is actually put on teachers then essentially within education, and what impact is that having on their own well-being as well as their pupils?
Well, yeah, I think we need to go back a stage and think, what impact does it have on head teachers? Because head teachers are under pressure to raise standards and raise results in those subjects. And then that pressure then is then passed down onto teachers. So they feel pressurised to raise results, and that pressure is then passed down onto children. So, you know, it's just cascading that pressure. And it has a massive impact on teacher wellbeing, because if you're working with a class of children, you know, who might be making fantastic progress, but are coming in with very low starting points, so they might have communication difficulties, special education needs, all sorts of problems, then, you know, they might not achieve in line with national expected attainment. So their attainment might not be in line with national expectations, with age-related expectations, but they may have made fantastic progress. So what we need to be doing is looking at the progress children are making from their starting points, rather than this obsessive kind of focus on children achieving age-related expectations. Because if children are coming in with very low starting points, you know, they might not achieve those age-related expectations within the time the government want them to achieve them. So I think it's a pressure for teachers working in particular types of schools. So, for example, you know, schools in areas of social deprivation, schools in areas where there's a lot of poverty and, you know, parental mental health, and, you know, I don't want to stereotype communities, but, you know, schools where there's lots of other issues going on, so drug abuse, alcohol abuse, domestic violence, etc., where maybe the parents don't have the capacity to actually support their children. I think, you know, I'm not saying the children in those communities cannot achieve.
Yeah.
And actually we should be, as educators, pushing them to achieve as much as they are capable of and to exceed those expectations. But actually some children will be coming in with very, very low starting points, and they will have complex needs, complex special educational needs, and, you know, this pressure to get children to achieve at age-related expectations is a massive pressure for teachers. And what this has done over the last sort of 15 years is this has created in some schools very toxic workplace cultures where teachers are measured against pupil results, and they're told that they're underperforming, and then they've been, you know, basically been managed out of the profession because maybe they haven't achieved the results with their classes that the leaders wanted them to achieve. And this has been really, really challenging, I think, for some schools and some teachers.
I think it's fascinating that you've raised these issues about certain areas and the backgrounds, and like having this focus on this age-related standard that children should be achieving when we're not actually considering their personal circumstances and backgrounds. Like, there's a lot of countries away from England, like we can even look at Northern Ireland, where they do consider children's personal background, and they look at the reason why, for example, if they're not achieving the attainment level meant to be, okay, what's going on in their background? For me, like, I can't understand why children's well-being and their circumstances and their background isn't taken into consideration, because you're saying as well that children are starting at a low point, and inevitably, unfortunately, that is going to be the case. But surely there has to be something done with the education system to support children from that environment, from that background, and not just have them as a number because you're already giving them. You're not giving them the same platform as other children. It's not fair. It's not equal.
Yeah, but if you look at other countries, like, say, for example, Scandinavian countries, like, you know, look at places like Denmark and Finland, where there's a much bigger focus on like play-based learning up until the age of 7 or 8. Whereas in our, you know, one of the problems with the UK education system, well, England particularly, is that children do the reception year. Well, they do the early years foundation stage, and then there's suddenly at the age of 5, there's a jump into the national curriculum, which becomes much more formal. The curriculum becomes more restricted. Suddenly, children are expected to focus on the academic side of learning rather than the social side of learning and the play-based aspects of learning. And I think that transition from the early years to Key Stage 1 is particularly problematic for some children, because some children aren't ready to make that transition, particularly children who have got underdeveloped language and communication skills. Those children need longer within play-based environments because they haven't got the communication skills. If they haven't achieved the early learning goals by the end of the foundation stage, then they need to continue that play-based pedagogy to enable them to achieve those early learning goals, rather than just transitioning them onto national curriculum. It's too soon, it's too abrupt for some children. And what we find is that countries that have much more of a play-based, child-centered approach to learning in the early years, actually their children do better when they get to 15. They exceed, children in the UK, they far exceed, where they are. It's difficult making comparisons because it's not like for like. So in some countries, they don't have children with special educational needs within mainstream classrooms. So it's not an automatic comparison. But yeah, I think a much bigger focus on child-centered learning, play-based learning, and just exploratory learning and social learning would actually have long-term positive impacts on children, rather than just this abrupt focus onto the national curriculum when they get to year 1, and this sudden restriction in the curriculum. For example, why do we assess children in the early years foundation stage against all those different areas of learning? So personal, social, and emotional development, language and communication. We assess them against a broad range of areas, and then suddenly we move them into national curriculum, and we stop assessing them in a broad way, and we just focus on maths and English. And I think that's detrimental to children's well-being. But also it's problematic because it's not just about social deprivation. There are some children from very affluent backgrounds who have poor mental health. So poor mental health isn't just about poverty and social deprivation. If you're from a very affluent background, then your parents actually might be placing pressure on you to succeed academically, which can be detrimental, but you might also be placing pressure on yourselves. So I went into an independent school, and they said to me that the biggest issue wasn't the parents. The biggest issue was that the students were placing pressure on themselves to achieve academically. So yeah, I think it's complex.
Yeah, completely. I completely agree, and I think, like I say, it's about changing that sort of approach from a test-based performance results sort of focus to almost a developmental focus, and sort of managing the process of children's development and people and student development rather than the end result. Because, like you say, then you can take into account certain factors and different situations, and you can still see that the impact is being had, rather than just, well, they haven't maybe reached that grade at the end, but they've still developed in that period of time, compared to where they were.
I think also I've always questioned, why do we place this focus on exams in schools? There's such a great focus on exams, but then when children move into higher education, like for example, I haven't done an exam since I did my A-levels. So, often, you know, people moving, I mean, I know some, depending on the course you do, there might be exams, but often people move into higher education and there's a much broader way of assessing students. So, you know, through group work, presentations, etc., you know, making products, all sorts of different modes of assessment, which I think is much more inclusive. So I just think that this focus on exams is the wrong focus, because actually that doesn't prepare students for what is coming next. And also, let's be honest, I mean, you know, you learn everything for an exam and then you forget it. You forget most of it, don't you? So I can't remember. So I did A-level chemistry. I can't remember any of it.
Yeah.
Because I've never used it since.
I think, and like say universities, well, particularly the course that we've had, we've sort of been taught to be assessed on a variety of ways, you know, sway presentations, group presentations, obviously assignments as well. And it is about sort of, I guess, reaching out to everyone's different preferred way of developing. And it's just ironic, like you say, that we teach kids, you know, throughout their school life to focus on one exam or two exams. And then you get to higher education and it's a completely different, you know, assessment process for some courses. So I think you're absolutely right. It's just about, you know, doing it in a way where people can sort of retain the information that they've learned and then use it moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that, you know, education shouldn't be just about cramming children with knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, the facts that they can regurgitate. It should be about transforming attitudes and values.
Yeah.
For me, this is what education is about. It's about actually shaping attitudes and values so that they can move forward and be, you know, good citizens, really, and can demonstrate values of inclusion and social justice. So, you know, there's no point really in just instilling facts and knowledge. You know, Ofsted talk about powerful knowledge. That's the buzzword at the moment. You know, this powerful knowledge that will provide children with cultural capital to succeed in life. Yeah, that's fine, but actually, children need to be good people. You know, they need to be good people and good citizens who actually can challenge prejudice, who will challenge prejudice and discrimination, and actually be good. You know, good people, and also be able to work with, you know, be able to respect diversity and celebrate diversity and see it as a positive. You know, so to me, that's what education should be about. It should be about challenging prejudice and discrimination so that we can have a much better, fairer, equitable society in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to pause it there just because my thing's saying that my pro hasn't worked, so I'm going to have to restart the link following on for the interview, just because I don't want to cut you halfway through speaking. So
you want me to sign out?
Yeah, if that's all right, and then
send a new link, Matty, because we can just cut this bit out anyway.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll just